Alright, happy Wednesday. So today's topic, how to turn misery into motivation in 4 steps. So I thought this would be a good one for hump day. But anyway, have you ever felt so, shitty about the state of your life and you kind of ask yourself, what have I got to look forward to? Or heard others utter that in their life when it hasn't exactly turned out the way they wanted it to? And have you also ever noticed that when people ask you that, ask you what they've got to look forward to, right? They don't necessarily want you to answer, and it usually starts to become an issue as people age and feel that their options are becoming narrower, right? And often these people as well, they just want to issue a statement of emphasis. So it's like hoping to get you to appreciate how they feel their life is, particularly when it has not gone as expected, and for the person they feel they have become or who they don't want to be, right? So they haven't quite made, they're not who they think they should be or where they thought they would be at this point in their time in life, right? And, and there'll be phrases like, I never thought I'd end up like this, and then they'll usually then stack up all the supporting evidence that they have, for that sentiment. So it could be things like, I'm single, I'm jobless, I'm broke, I'm overweight, I don't have a handle on my kids, or whatever it is, right? Or I don't have any time to myself, or I work too much, or any of those sorts of things, right? And they've basically kind of reached a point where they feel like their life hasn't worked out how they assumed it would, and what they'd assumed would make them feel, happy and fulfilled. And then the natural then inferment, if that's even a word, inferment, let's just make it one, is that, because they're not quite where they want to be now, that there can't possibly be any hope and there's no future to change that. And of course, I just want to point out as well, there's an important distinction here that, the person, if it's yourself or someone else, you're not necessarily catastrophizing things, right? Or catastrophizing things, sorry. You're not thinking that, your future's going to be, like, devastating and all that sort of stuff. It's more that you feel a bit fatalistic, right? And this distinction is important as it may indicate where you or others need potentially some additional professional support from a mental health perspective, right? And the purpose of this vlog is not to assess you or to diagnose you or to help you assess or diagnose, depressive thinking styles and others either, right? What we're doing here instead is kind of just helping you to develop some awareness of yourself and others as to when we might need just a little bit of help getting a sense of the fact that there could be a meaningful future. So it's really just changing how we're kind of feeling in that moment and getting us to shift our perspective sooner rather than later so that we can move forward, right? And there's 4 steps in which you can help build a sense of a better future for either yourself or someone else. And step 1 is simply to refrain where necessary. And you do this by gently challenging perspective. So, for example, and we've all said this at some point, I think I've said it many times, for example, when we talk about ending up a certain way. So, for example, it's phrases like, I don't want to end up being ... or end up being like ... right? And think about it, like, what does that actually even mean, right? Like, where do we exactly even really end up? There are people, at any age making different choices each day and changing the trajectory of their future and even, how they can live that day or the next day, right? And it may seem really simplistic, but using unchallenged phrases like this reinforces the assumption that life just happens to us, and it makes us kind of like a victim of the particular circumstances we happen to find ourselves in, which in turn obviously closes us off to other future possibilities. So to challenge these type of assumptions that we just sort of take for granted and don't even, we're not even really that aware of because it's so dominant in everyday language, it really helps us to, to see things differently. So to challenge these type of assumptions, what we do is we just ask questions. And you can ask yourself, mentally, or you can write them down and then answer them, or you can ask other people questions, right? So number 1, is it possible for someone to feel hopeless about their future only for things to improve and for life to feel more meaningful? And if that's the case, how might that happen? Can a person live a different life from the one they expected but still find it meaningful and enjoyable? Number 3, might someone think that they want something, but when they find it's not all it's cracked up to be, when they get it? And 4, can a person meet an emotional need in more than one way? Now, you might not even necessarily have to write down the answers or even come up with answers here, but see how just even asking those questions opens you up to the possibility of thinking differently. And notice as well that those questions aren't done, they're done more in a third person point of view, right? So we're not trying to challenge you directly because the ego or another person's ego might kind of flare up and go into protective mode and shut us back down again. So the whole idea is to ask questions in a way that opens us up to thinking a little bit differently, right? And then step 2, once you've done that, is to take stock of what you do have, what you have gained, and not what you don't have or have lost, right? So, and the trick here is to actually do it in 3 parts. So the first part is to actually just list out what you think you don't have or what you've lost. Then the next step is to have a really good think about what you do have and what you've gained, and write them all down, right? And you usually find that this list tends to be longer than the first. And then the third one, which is even more fun, is to write down some of the items that you might or could have, right? So we're sort of thinking, oh, well, what would I like? And then that becomes a bit more fun as well, right? And then step number 3 is to link your goals to your core values. So say, for example, you realize that you don't want your life just to be about you want to add value to other people's lives and to inspire and to be inspired, right? You know, and after all, I think a lot of us do want to help each other, right? You know, life isn't a product to be consumed purely for personal satisfaction, but a time to learn, to contribute, and to help others, right? And if that's the case, then, you know, that's one of your goals identified, right? And then let's just say, you know, you have a look at your values and you should know roughly what they are, and just pick 3. Doesn't matter if they're not the top 3 or whatever. Just be the ones that come to you first up, because they'll probably, you know, it's what your gut's telling you, your subconscious. They're the ones on your mind, so put them in. So let's just identify 3. So say, for example, integrity, honesty, and perseverance. So then what you want to do then with that is then to identify the areas in your life where potentially you can connect these items, so your goals and your values, to what's already happening in your life. So, you know, you can ask a question, for example, and write down an answer to this again. You know, does your job or business enable you to be proactive and develop your core values or support your goal? You know, and if it's more relevant, a community or family, whatever it is, that aspect of your life that potentially could offer that, that's what you want to write down and take stock of, right? And then number 2 is to say, okay, well, what type of relationships do you need to feel connected, nourished, and loved, and, you know, to feel like you're supported to do your goals and are connected to your values, or having those shared values as well, right? And number 3 is to identify what other activities in your life contribute to your goals and align with your values, right? So it could be, again, being part of you know, some sort of club, you know, like whether it's a knitting club or an exercise sporting club, whatever, right? And then step 4 is then to find ways to enjoy the journey so the destination arrives naturally. And we do this again by asking some questions, right? So this is where you get to think about, what do you love to do? You know, is this like exercising or writing or listening to music, laughing with friends, and so on? And then when you experience those moments, how could you start to notice more of this sense of joy in the future? Now, do you need to go and spend more time doing those things, or, you know, is it just a moment of taking a mental note to kind of remember and enjoy and make note to be present in the moment when you're doing those sorts of things? Now, the next part is taking the questions the next step further, right? What we want to do is then take the time to visualize not simply the outcomes of what you'd like to pursue in your future, but also enjoying the process of developing these facets in your future life. So it's like, a lot of people look at the goal and they're like, they just get so focused on trying to get that goal that they miss all the stuff that happens in between, which is the fun part, right? So, you know, I see this in bodybuilding when people are first doing their competitions. You know, they're so goal oriented. They're like, I'll do everything just to get on stage, and then they don't get the outcome that they were expecting, right? And then they feel like it was kind of hopeless and a waste of time. But it wasn't, because there's a lot of things that they had to learn and to put in place and to push themselves to be able to get to that time, right? And that's where all the gold is, because that's the process that you then have to unpack and see what you can do differently to potentially improve the outcomes or the results that you got last time, right? So, now the reason that, you know, we do the questioning and the visualization is because it actually helps us connect the 2 halves of our brain, which actually helps us then enjoy the process of life and progressing towards our goals, as I just mentioned. So just to give you a bit of a brief rudimentary explanation of how the brain works. And obviously, I'm not a neuroscientist, and so it's heavily simplified and potentially butchered. But let's just imagine, for example, that the left hemisphere of the brain is all about. Sorry, give me a second. The left hand is all about grasping, getting, and manipulating. So it's the logical side. It's around how do we actually get to the KPIs, for example. Whereas our right-hand side of the brain, or right hemisphere, sees the wider context, appreciates differing views, and is more generous and more connective. So the right brain, for example, is the thing that has us do things for their own sake, not for some narrow end or focus. So, for example, it's this part of ourselves that enjoys walking for the sensuality and the connection with nature, not merely as a means to log 10,000 steps on our smartwatch, right? And it doesn't seem time spent with a friend or admiring a beautiful painting or sunset as time wasted just because it's not work, right? So the problem is with modern society, we tend to live more in a left brain world where, productivity is king, and it's one that's reductive, and things are binary, black and white, and mechanistic, right? And not so alive. The left brain, as I said, is all about productivity and KPIs. And yet, obviously, when we actually learn to enjoy the process of life, the outcomes kind of take over themselves, right? So when we actually shift our focus from seeing a task as a means to an end, and zoom out from the expectations we have on how life should be and keeping up with the Joneses, and how fit we should be, or how much money we should have, and how much time we should have, and who should be respecting us, and so on, we give ourselves instead to have a chance to be curious and to see what, if anything, comes of that, and just enjoy the experience of at least learning to do something. So I know it's a little bit off kilter from potentially from a fitness and nutrition point of view, and even a mindset point of view, but our existential health, which is our sense of meaning, connection, and purpose in life, is a pillar of when we look at a holistic health model, right? And if we don't have this piece, like some time to nourish this and pull out the weeds and things like that, it makes everything else harder, because if we don't appreciate this, what are we even doing, right? So existential health, in my opinion, is something that you do need to work on, and hence why in my coaching programs we do focus a little bit on that, and even courses as well. We look a lot at goals, but also connecting that to deeper values and so on. So anyway, let me know what you guys think. Like, share your thoughts in the comments if you've had similar thoughts, if this process was useful, any other considerations and so on, and if you found this post valuable. Looking forward to seeing your comments and interacting more.